You dare put your filthy hands on his mother, you useless black maid! The words sliced through the quiet of the Harrington estate like a whip. Serena Vale's voice rang off the high ceilings of the sunlit library, elegant in sound and vicious in meaning. Lila Brooks, only 28 but already carrying the calm of someone who'd seen too much, was crouched on the Persian rug, her arms wrapped protectively around the frail body of Mrs. Margaret Harrington. Margaret, 78, shook like a leaf in Lila's embrace. Her breath came in shallow bursts. Her eyes, normally soft and kind, were wide with a fear that didn't belong in a house she'd lived in for 40 years. "Please, Miss Serena," Lila begged, her voice trembling. "She's in pain. Her heart can't take this. Please, don't—" Serena's stiletto heel slammed into Lila's hip. "Get off her, you meddling piece of trash!" Serena hissed, the diamond on her finger catching the afternoon light as if even the ring approved of her cruelty. "This is none of your business. Do you hear me? None of your business." Pain shot up Lila's side, hot and sharp. She swallowed a cry, tightening her hold around Margaret's fragile frame. "Stop," Lila gasped, forcing the word past the lump in her throat. "She's your fiancé's mother. Please think of her heart. She doesn't deserve this." Serena laughed. It wasn't the glittering laugh she used at charity galas, the one that made photographers adore her. No, this sound was ugly, shrill, like glass being dragged across stone. "Look at you," she sneered, "pretending to be some kind of hero. You're nothing, Lila, a maid. Staff, stay in your lane." On the sideboard, a polished silver tray gleamed. Serena snatched it up and hurled it across the room. It spun in the air and smashed into the far wall with a violent clang, barely missing Lila's head before crashing to the floor. Shards of china and porcelain teacups exploded around them, skittering across the rug. Lila flinched but didn't let go. "Mrs. Harrington," she whispered urgently, feeling the older woman's weight sag in her arms. "I've got you. Just breathe for me, okay? In and out. That's it." Margaret's thin fingers clawed at Lila's sleeve, lips moving soundlessly. "Let her go!" Serena shrieked. "You're hurting her. You're hurting her, Lila. Daniel! Daniel, help!" A shadow fell across the archway. "What the hell is going on in here?" Daniel Harrington, 6'2", crisp navy suit, tie loosened from a full day of meetings, stood in the doorway. His storm blue eyes widened at the scene laid out before him. His mother hunched in the maid's arms, his fiancée trembling theatrically, the shattered remains of a tea set scattered like wreckage. Perfect, Serena thought. She even managed a soft choke in her throat. "Daniel," she cried, whirling toward him, face pale but eyes glittering with calculation. "Thank God. I tried to stop her, but she snapped. She shoved your mother. She wouldn't let go." "That's not what happened," Lila rasped, her voice hoarse. She looked up, eyes glassy with tears and shock. "Sir, I swear I was trying to shield her. Serena was—" "Shut up!" Serena's mask slipped just for a second. She pointed a manicured finger at Lila like she was pointing a weapon. "You think you can barge in here and play savior? You think anyone is going to believe you over me?" She spun back to Daniel, letting her lower lip tremble. "She's dangerous, Daniel. Look at her. Look what she did. I told you something wasn't right." Daniel's jaw clenched. He stepped forward, eyes moving over the scene, searching for a version that made sense, finding none that didn't hurt. "Lila," he said quietly, eyes fixed on her. "Get away from my mother." Lila's heart bottomed out. "Mr. Harrington, please," she whispered. "Just listen to me. I said," he snapped, voice turning sharp enough to cut. "Step away from my mother. Now." Behind him, Serena released a breath of theatrical relief. "Thank you," she whispered. "She was scaring me to death." Hands shaking, Lila carefully eased Margaret against the chaise, propping her up with trembling arms. She brushed the older woman's hair from her forehead. "She needs a doctor," Lila pleaded, turning to Daniel. "Please, don't do this. Don't let her be alone with—" "I trusted you," Daniel muttered, more to himself than anyone. In that moment, trust felt like a joke, a luxury he'd been stupid enough to afford. You're fired." The words dropped between them, heavy and flat. "Pack your things and leave my house. Now." Lila's mouth fell open. A protest rose in her chest, a single breath of defense, but she swallowed it. She had seen this story before. She knew how it ended when truth tried to stand up to power. Power always won. She pushed herself slowly to her feet, straightening her black uniform as if that could somehow hold together the pieces of her dignity. "I was only trying to help her," she said softly. "Get out," Serena snapped, her tone low and razor-sharp now that the performance was nearly complete. "Before I call the police. You've done enough damage." Lila looked one last time at Margaret's face, drawn, ashen, eyes full of desperation, and then at Daniel's cold, conflicted gaze. "Please," she said quietly, "don't leave her alone with her again." No one answered. So Lila turned and walked out of the library, past Serena's satisfied smirk, past the glittering shards of china on the marble floor, past a lifetime of knowing exactly how this world saw her. Outside, rain had begun to fall in a fine, steady curtain. Her old green Honda waited at the end of the circular drive, rust along the wheel wells and a soft rattle in the engine. She gripped her duffel bag tighter and kept walking, each step measured, back straight, even as something inside her cracked. Behind her, the Harrington mansion glowed warm and golden through the rain. Inside, Daniel knelt beside his mother, helping her to a chair. "Mom," he murmured gently, "are you all right?" Margaret's fingers shook as they closed around his wrist. Her lips parted, but the words didn't come. Her gaze drifted past him, toward the door where Lila had disappeared, eyes filled with something that looked a lot like grief. Serena hovered a few feet away, arms crossed, silk blouse unruffled, voice perfectly pitched. "You see," she said softly, as if the whole scene had wounded her. "I told you she was unstable. The way she grabbed your mother. Daniel, I've been worried for weeks." Daniel stared at the broken porcelain on the floor, at the rug disturbed by the struggle, at the image he couldn't quite reconcile, his mother clinging to the maid, his fiancée screaming, and a story that didn't sit right no matter how he turned it. But exhaustion and pride made a powerful pair. So for the moment, he let the lie stand. Outside in the downpour, the only person who had truly protected his mother was driving away, carrying the stain of a crime she hadn't committed. The rain hadn't let up by the time Lila reached the edge of Charleston. It came down in sheets that blurred the highway lines and turned headlights into smears of white. Her wipers worked frantically, squeaking across the cracked windshield. Her hip throbbed, right where Serena's heel had landed, and every press of the clutch sent a dull ache up her side. "Useless black maid." The words replayed like a bad song she couldn't shut off. She'd heard those things before, of course. The words changed, the accents changed, but the meaning never did. She just hadn't expected to hear it in a house with crystal chandeliers and $30,000 oil paintings. She pulled off at a gas station with one flickering neon sign and an awning that barely kept out the weather. The place sat on the outskirts of town, half convenience store, half tired sanctuary. Inside, a teenage cashier in a hoodie barely looked up from his phone. Lila poured herself a cup of burnt coffee from the metal dispenser, added too much sugar, and paid with the last crumpled $5 in her pocket. When she stepped back outside, the rain had softened to a mist, turning the parking lot into a glossy, shimmering sheet. She sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the steering wheel. "You did the right thing," she told herself quietly. "You did what you were supposed to do." It didn't make her hip hurt less. It didn't make losing another job easier. Doing what was right never seemed to pay the bills. A flash of lightning lit the interior of the car, briefly illuminating her trembling hands. She tightened her grip on the wheel. She drove until the lights of the city gave way to dark stretches of road and pine trees. Eventually, a hand-painted sign appeared on the right. "Whisper Pines Lodge. Vacancy. Weekly rates." Lila took the turn. The little roadside inn looked exactly the way she remembered it from years ago, back when she'd bounced between nursing assignments and overnight shifts. Peeling paint, dark green shutters, a front office that smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and lemon cleaner. The woman behind the counter looked up with tired blue eyes and a gravelly voice. "One night or more?" she asked. "One night," Lila replied softly. "Maybe two. 45 cash," the woman said. "No smoking, No parties, and don't complain about the heater. Understood. The room they gave her smelled like old carpet and rain. The bedspread was mismatched, the lampshade slightly crooked, but the lock on the door worked, and for now that was enough. Lila sat on the edge of the bed and set her duffel bag at her feet. After a moment, she pulled out a small, worn notebook, the one she'd started the day they buried her mother. Her pen scratched across the page with shaky strokes. I lost another job today. Not because I failed, because I refused to watch someone hurt an old woman who reminded me of you. They saw my skin before they saw my heart. Again, I'd still do it again. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let the tears fall. She closed the notebook and reached into the pocket of her jacket. Wrapped in tissue paper was a small silver hairpin, delicate and old-fashioned. Margaret had pressed it into her palm 2 weeks earlier, smiling weakly. For luck, she'd said, I don't have much else to give you. Her tuana, Lila held the pin now, feeling the cool metal against her skin, and wondered if Margaret was all right, or if she was lying in that big house, frightened and alone. Across town, the Harrington mansion had gone quiet. Daniel stood in the hallway outside his mother's bedroom, shoulders tense beneath his dress shirt. The doctor had already come and gone, assuring him that the bruises were minor and the shock was manageable. She needs rest, the doctor had said, and less stress. Her heart can't keep taking hits like this. Serena stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself in a silk robe the color of champagne. You see why I didn't want that woman here? She said softly. She was always watching, always inserting herself where she didn't belong. Daniel frowned. She's been nothing but kind to my mother for months. There had to be a reason. People like her hold grudges, Serena replied, her tone tightening just enough to show the steel beneath the softness. Maybe your mother criticized her. Maybe she felt small and wanted power over someone for once. You know how they get. People like her, he repeated quietly. She blinked. You know what I mean. He stared at her for a long moment, then turned away. I'm going to check on my mother. Of course, darling, Serena said, sliding her mask back on. I'll make you some tea. In the guest room, Margaret lay propped against her pillows, her silver hair slightly disheveled, a faint bruise blooming along her ribs. She stared at the ceiling, eyes wet. It wasn't the pain that hurt the most. It was the look she'd seen in her son's eyes when he'd walked into the library, the look that said he believed beauty before he believed history. She flinched at a knock on the door. Come in, she called weakly. Rosa, the head housekeeper, stepped in carrying a tray. I brought you soup, Mrs. Harrington. Thank you, Rosa. Rosa hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. I don't believe she did it, ma'am. Margaret's eyes filled again. Neither do I. She treated you like family, Rosa continued. You can't fake that, not month after month. Margaret reached for Rosa's hand, fingers curling around it with what little strength she had. If you hear from her, she whispered, from Lila, tell her I'm sorry. Tell her she should never have had to carry the blame for my son's blindness. Rosa's own voice trembled. Yes, ma'am, I will. Downstairs in the gleaming white kitchen, Serena stirred sugar into her tea, the spoon clinking softly against the porcelain. Her lips curled into a satisfied smile. For the moment, she had won. But down the hall, in a quiet corner of the library, high above the shelves, half hidden in the carved paneling, a tiny red light blinked on a small security camera Daniel had insisted on installing months earlier, after a string of robberies in the neighborhood. He'd forgotten it was there. Serena never knew it existed. But it had seen everything. And in the silence of the big house, as rain beat against the windows and lies settled into the walls, that little lens held on to the truth, frame by frame, waiting for the day someone would finally ask to see it. The rain hadn't stopped since the moment Tasha Rivers walked out of the Mercer estate. It sheeted down the windshield of her faded blue Honda like the sky itself was grieving, wipers squeaking in a frantic rhythm that couldn't quite keep up. Her uniform was still damp where Cassandra's stiletto had slammed into her hip. Every bump in the road sent a dull ache pulsing through her side, but the pain in her chest was worse. Useless black maid. She'd heard words like that before, but never in a house with crystal chandeliers and oil paintings worth more than her entire life savings. Never while she was literally shielding the woman who'd shown her more kindness in 4 months than most people had shown her in years. Evelyn Mercer, the billionaire's mother. The woman who offered Tasha tea when the other staff barely remembered to say good morning. The woman who pressed a silver hair comb into Tasha's palm 2 weeks earlier and whispered, "For luck, dear. The world is cruel. You shouldn't have to face it empty-handed." Now Evelyn was upstairs, bruised and breathless, and Tasha was on the highway with $23 in her wallet and nowhere to go. At a flickering gas station on the edge of Charleston, she pulled in beneath a buzzing neon sign and just sat there for a moment, hands locked around the steering wheel. The rain drummed on the roof like fingers tapping out a question. Was it worth it? She already knew the answer. "Yes," she whispered to the empty car. "I'd do it again." Inside the convenience store, the young cashier in a hoodie barely glanced up from his phone as she poured herself burnt coffee and dumped in too much sugar. She slid her last crumpled $5 across the counter. "You look like you fought a hurricane," he muttered. Tasha gave a tired half smile. "Something like that." Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle. She sat in her car, coffee growing cold in her hands, watching water trail down the glass in crooked lines. In the mirror, her reflection stared back. Dark skin, tired eyes, a smear of foundation where Regina's ring had grazed her cheek. "You did the right thing," she told the face in the mirror, but doing right never seemed to pay. She drove until the city lights faded behind her, and the road narrowed into a two-lane strip flanked by pine trees. At the edge of a sleepy town, a weathered sign appeared on the right. Whispering Pines Lodge. Weekly rates. Cash only. The little roadside inn hadn't changed since the last time she'd stayed there as a traveling CNA, bouncing between contracts in understaffed nursing homes. Same peeling green shutters, same concrete swan planter leaning dangerously to one side. Inside, the lobby smelled like old smoke and lemon cleaner. A woman with a gravelly voice and steel gray hair sat behind the desk, glasses perched on the end of her nose. "One night or a week?" she asked without preamble. "One night," Tasha said. Her voice sounded smaller than she liked. 45 cash. No parties, no complaints, and if the heater rattles, pretend it's a free sound machine. Tasha slid her dwindling cash across the counter. The woman's eyes softened just a fraction as she noticed the damp uniform and bruised posture. "Bad shift?" she asked. "Bad everything," Tasha replied. "Well," the woman said, sliding over a key with a brass tag, "Room 6 doesn't care what the world thinks of you. That's something." The room smelled faintly of damp carpet and rain. The bed squeaked when she sat down. She dropped her duffel on the floor, eased herself onto the mattress, and for a long moment just stared at the cracked ceiling. Then she did the one thing that had kept her sane since her mother died. She pulled out the small spiral notebook she'd started at the funeral. "My book of surviving," her mom would have called it, and began to write. "I lost another job today. Not because of what I did, but because of what I am. Still, I'd do it again. I couldn't let her hurt that old woman." Her handwriting shook with exhaustion, ink pooling at the end of each sentence. When she finished, she closed the notebook and reached into the pocket of her jacket. Wrapped in a scrap of tissue paper was the silver hair comb Evelyn had given her. "For luck." Tasha held it in her palm, cool and solid, an anchor in the storm of doubt. For the first time since she'd slammed the Mercer front door behind her, she let herself wonder, was Mrs. Evelyn all right? Had anyone called a doctor? Did Julian even see his mother reaching for Tasha's hand before he fired her? "Probably not," Tasha whispered. Men like Julian Mercer lived in a world of contracts and balance sheets, not in moments of trembling fingers and whispered gratitude. Across town, in the silent halls of the Mercer estate, Julian stood outside his mother's bedroom, hands shoved deep in his pockets. The private physician had come and gone, leaving behind instructions and a bottle of pain medication. "Bruising," he'd said. "A scare more than an injury? She needs rest and less stress." Less stress. As if he could just call the universe's manager and file a complaint. Inside, Evelyn lay propped against pillows, silver hair loose around her face. The faint outline of fingers showed on her wrist, a shadow where someone had grabbed too hard. "You see?" Cassandra murmured from the window, silk robe cinched perfectly around her waist. That maid was always intense. I told you. Julian's jaw clenched. Tasha has been nothing but kind to my mother for months. What could possibly make her snap? Cassandra's expression tightened almost imperceptibly before settling into something sympathetic. People like her, she said softly. They hold grudges. Maybe she thought your mother didn't respect her. You know how they get when they feel small? People like her. The words didn't sit right, but Julian was too tired to unpack why. He rubbed a hand across his face and murmured, I'm going to check on Mom. Of course, darling, Cassandra replied, voice dripping honey. I'll make chamomile tea. We all need to calm down. In Evelyn's room, the old woman's eyes fluttered open as her son approached. Julian, she whispered. Her fingers twitched toward him, then toward the empty space at her side where Tasha usually sat reading psalms in a soft voice. Don't worry about anything, he said quickly, misreading her gaze. She's gone. You won't have to deal with her again. Something like sorrow passed through Evelyn's eyes. Oh, Julian, she murmured. But the pain medication blurred her words, and he took it for gratitude. Downstairs in the kitchen, Linda, the head housekeeper who'd worked for the Mercers 20 years, stood at the sink, staring at the empty spot where Tasha usually leaned while humming church songs under her breath. I don't believe she did it, Linda muttered as she rinsed a mug that still smelled faintly of jasmine tea. She didn't, she whispered to no one. Not the way they think. That night, Tasha found a small diner near the motel, a neon sign buzzing in the mist. Betty's Corner Grill. Inside, the waitresses called everyone honey, and the coffee was strong enough to stand a spoon in. She slid into a booth with cracked red vinyl and stared at the laminated menu without seeing it. You look like you've seen a ghost, the waitress said, topping off her water. Just a bad day at work, Tasha replied. Who hasn't had one of those? The woman chuckled. You want pie? I'm breaking the rules tonight. Tasha hesitated, then nodded. The slice of cherry pie was warm, crust flaking, sugar melting into comfort she hadn't known she needed. When she'd eaten as much as she could, she slipped a note under the saucer. Thank you for being kind to a stranger. I'll pay it forward when I can. Back in her room at Whispering Pines, the rain tapped a softer rhythm against the window. Tasha sat at the wobbly desk, pulled a hotel notepad toward her, and began to write a letter she wasn't sure she'd ever send. Dear Mr. Mercer, I know you don't owe me an explanation, and maybe I don't deserve one, but I need you to know I never meant harm. Your mother's safety was all I cared about. I wish you'd seen what really happened. Sincerely, Tasha Rivers. She folded it neatly, slid it into an envelope, and stared at Julian's name for a long time. Men like him lived in a world where apologies traveled on legal letterhead, not motel stationery. Still, she tucked the envelope into her bag. Across the city, while the Mercer mansion finally grew quiet, a tiny red light blinked in the corner of Evelyn's sitting room, on one of the new discreet security cameras Julian had installed months ago after a string of burglaries in Charleston's wealthiest neighborhoods. Everyone had forgotten the camera was there. Everyone, except the camera. It had watched Cassandra pace. It had watched the teacup fly, watched Evelyn stumble, watched Tasha rush forward to shield her from a kick meant to drive old bones into the floor. It had watched Julian walk in at the worst possible second and believed the loudest liar in the room. Frame by frame, the little device stored the truth while the house slept, waiting. The next morning, the sky broke into a washed-out blue over Whispering Pines. Tasha stepped out of her room to the sound of a mop sloshing and a voice humming an old hymn. A cleaning cart was parked outside her door. Behind it stood a woman in her 60s with kind blue eyes and laugh lines etched deeply into her face. Her name tag read, Grace Turner. You're the nurse who checked in the other night, Grace asked, studying her with that particular brand of curiosity seasoned people earn. Used to be, Tasha said. Now I clean houses, Grace smirked. So you heal people in their mess. Busy life. She paused, then tilted her head. Bad night? Bad month, Tasha admitted. You don't want to hear it. Sometimes saying it out loud is the only way to keep it from eating you alive, Grace replied gently, leaning on her mop. But I'm just the cleaning lady. What do I know? Something in her tone, half joke, half invitation, was too familiar to ignore. Tasha opened the door wider. Come in for a minute. The floor's already a mess anyway. So in that small, musty motel room, with rain-damp curtains and a heater that rattled like a distant train, Tasha told a stranger what had happened. I worked for this family, she said quietly. Rich, powerful. Their mother was so sweet, frail, but sharp. I tried to protect her, and they believed the wrong person. Grace listened without interrupting, eyes never leaving Tasha's face. You mean they fired you for saving her? Grace said at last. Fired me, accused me, almost called the police, Tasha replied. If I were louder, if I'd pushed back, I'd probably be in a cell right now. Grace shook her head slowly. People with money forget they bleed the same color as the rest of us. Tasha gave a small, grateful smile. You sound like my mother. What happened to her? Grace asked softly. She died 3 years ago. Heart failure. She used to say, you can't choose what the world calls you, baby, but you can choose who you answer to. I thought I understood that until today. Grace squeezed her shoulder. Maybe now you really do. Outside, the highway hummed. Somewhere back in Charleston, the Mercer name was still spotless. Cassandra's social media still sparkling with carefully curated smiles. And in a mansion with too many rooms and not enough soul, a billionaire sat at his desk, staring at a broken teacup he'd asked the staff to save from the cleanup. The porcelain had been glued back together, hairline cracks still visible. Julian turned it over in his hands and whispered, Why would she hurt you, Mom? Why would anyone? But deep in his chest, under the neat layers of logic and pride, a quiet unease had begun to stir. The kind that comes when the story you're repeating no longer fits the way it did the first time you told it. The kind that doesn't go away until the truth finally speaks. By the time another gray dawn crept over the Mercer estate, the house looked unchanged from the outside. Manicured lawn, white columns, glass gleaming like nothing ugly had ever happened behind it. But inside, the silence felt different. It wasn't the comfortable hush of wealth. It was the heavy quiet that follows a slammed door and words that can't be taken back. Julian stood in his study, staring at the rain-streaked windows, coffee cooling untouched on his desk. His reflection hovered over the garden like a ghost in a navy suit. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same frozen image. His mother in pain, Tasha crouched beside her, Cassandra crying with perfect timing. And beneath it all, the sharp echo of his own voice. You're fired. Pack your things and leave. Something about that moment grated now, like a poorly cut stone in his shoe. Julian? Cassandra's voice drifted from the doorway, wrapped in satin and sugar. She wore a champagne-colored robe, her hair flawless despite the restless night. You've been in here all morning. You're torturing yourself. He didn't turn. Am I? You saw what that girl did, Cassandra said, crossing the room. You're too kind. You're trying to rationalize crazy. He finally looked at her. You said she shoved you, he murmured. Held you so hard you'd have bruises. Yes, Cassandra answered quickly. You saw how wild she was. His gaze dropped almost involuntarily to her bare arms. Not a mark. So where are they? He asked quietly. She froze for a fraction of a second. Then she laughed, the sound brittle. You think I'm lying over a bruise? She scoffed. Julian, really, after everything? I thought you trusted me. I did, he said. The past tense hung between them like a crack in glass. Before she could respond, there was a soft knock. Linda stepped in, balancing a breakfast tray. Mrs. Mercer is asking for her tea upstairs, she said. And she keeps asking about Miss Rivers. Cassandra's eyes flashed. She'll forget her soon enough. Julian's attention snapped back to Linda. Asking what exactly? Whether Tasha found another position yet? Linda replied carefully. She said she worries about her. Cassandra rolled her eyes. Of course she does. Your mother has always been attached to strays. Enough, Julian said sharply, surprising even himself. Thank you, Linda. I'll bring the tea. When the housekeeper left, Cassandra stepped closer, lowering her voice. You're letting that woman get into your head, she said. Again. That's what she wanted. Or maybe I'm just trying not to ignore what doesn't add up, he replied. You better be careful, Julian. she murmured, the sweetness thinning. You start doubting me now, you'll regret it. Then with a practiced smile, she glided out, leaving her perfume and a chill behind. Upstairs, Evelyn sat propped against pillows, her prayer book open on her lap. The bruise on her shoulder had darkened overnight, a purple crescent beneath the collar of her nightgown. Here, Julian said softly, handing her tea. How are you feeling? Like someone mistook my bones for a doormat, she replied dryly. But I'm here. He gave a partial smile despite himself. Mom. Yes, she prompted, reading the weight behind the word. What exactly do you remember about yesterday? He asked. Her fingers brushed the rim of the cup. Voices, she said slowly. Cassandra's. Loud. Fear. And Tasha's arms around me when I thought I was going to hit the floor. That's after she pushed you? He pressed. Evelyn's eyes met his, sharp even through the fatigue. Sometimes, Julian, she said quietly, people hold on too tightly when they're trying to stop someone else from falling. He swallowed. Do you believe Tasha was trying to hurt you? No, Evelyn said simply. I believe she kept something much worse from happening. And you didn't say that yesterday. I tried, she murmured, glancing toward the door. But you were listening to someone else. He stood there a moment, feeling his mother's words settle heavily in his chest. Down the hall, a small security panel blinked lazily on the wall near the library. He'd installed the updated system months ago, more concerned about strangers coming in than about what was already inside. Now that little blinking light felt like an accusation. How much had he missed because he thought he didn't need to look? After lunch, he found himself standing in front of that panel, fingers hovering over the screen. A list of feeds appeared. Foyer, rear garden, main hall, library, auto backup enabled. That last one had a recent timestamp, the same hour the teacup had shattered. His pulse picked up. A few taps, a password, a spinning icon. Then a thumbnail appeared. Evelyn in her favorite armchair, book open, Cassandra pacing like a caged animal in couture. Julian hesitated. Then he hit play. The room came to life. No music, no editing, just sound. You think your son will still care what you say when I'm done with you? Cassandra's voice snapped through the speakers like a whip. Evelyn's reply was soft but steady. If you can't respect his mother, you don't belong in this house. The image jolted as Cassandra's arm swept forward. The teacup flew, shards sparkling midair, before they vanished out of frame. Evelyn stumbled. Julian's heart climbed into his throat. Seconds later, Tasha appeared, dropping the duster in her hand, sliding between Evelyn and the marble edge of the table as Cassandra lunged again. Please, Miss Blake, stop, Tasha's voice pleaded. She's not well. You're hurting her. Get your filthy hands off his mother, you useless black maid, Cassandra spat, the words coated in venom. Her heel slammed forward. Tasha's body absorbed the kick meant for the older woman. Julian flinched even though he already knew what came next. His own footsteps, his own voice exploding into the scene, already decided before he'd asked a single question. He watched himself bark. You're fired. Watched Tasha's face crumple and harden all at once. Watched his mother's trembling hand reach toward the woman he was throwing out. Watched himself miss it. He stopped the footage. Then he played it again and again. By the fourth replay, he couldn't feel his hands. Dear God, he whispered to the empty room. Not because he believed God would answer, but because there was no corporate language for the moment you realize you've sided with both cruelty and a lie. While Julian's world tilted on its axis in the library, a different kind of truth was finally moving toward him through the postal system. At a small-town post office, Tasha slid a brown envelope into the metal chute. Inside was a flash drive she hadn't known she possessed until the previous night, when she'd emptied the pockets of the uniform she'd been too numb to wash. The card had probably fallen from one of the cameras Evelyn's nurse used to monitor her when she slept. That's what Tasha told herself. Or maybe fate just has really strange timing, she thought. She'd watched the clip alone on her battered laptop, the motel room wall flickering with shadows as Cassandra's words and her own pain played back in cold, impartial pixels. It was all there. The sneer, the slur, the kick. The moment Julian stepped in at exactly the wrong time and chose beauty over truth. This is what really happened, Tasha wrote in a short note, hand cramped around the cheap motel pen. For Mrs. Mercer's sake, please watch. She didn't sign it with anger. She signed it with something that hurt worse. Hope. Back at the mansion, that same kind of hope, shaky, unsure, found a small opening in Julian's chest and slipped inside. He didn't tell Cassandra about the footage. Not yet. Instead, he walked upstairs to his mother's room and sat at the edge of her bed, watching her doze. Her fingers, veined and fragile, still bore faint impressions where someone had clutched too hard. I believed the wrong person, he said quietly, the words more confession than statement. Evelyn stirred, eyes fluttering open. Then believe better now, she murmured. That's why the truth keeps bothering you. That afternoon, when the courier dropped the Mercer mail on a silver tray just inside the front door, Linda barely glanced at it. There were always invitations, invoices, glossy magazines with Cassandra's smile printed on coated paper. One envelope, though, was different. No logo, no return address, just his name written in neat, careful script. Mr. Julian Mercer, personal. Later, after a day of meetings where his mind wasn't really in the room, Julian found the envelope sitting on his desk. He almost tossed it aside with the rest. Almost. Instead, he opened it and unfolded the single sheet. This is not about forgiveness. It's about truth. For your mother's sake, please watch what's inside. I don't want revenge. I just want peace. A small flash drive slipped out onto the wood. It was the second copy of the same truth. Julian sat back, the letter trembling in his fingers. He plugged the drive into his computer with a care he usually reserved for delicate negotiations. Same room, same scene. But this time, he didn't just see the sequence. He saw himself. He watched his mother's eyes when he chose Cassandra's story. Watched the way Tasha's shoulders squared as she absorbed blame that didn't belong to her. Shame crawled up his spine like ice water. From the hallway, Cassandra's laughter floated in, sugar sweet on a phone call with some lifestyle journalist, talking about charity galas and legacy. You wanted a legacy, he whispered to the empty room. You're about to get one. He hit pause on a frame where Tasha's face was turned toward the door, eyes wide, body curved protectively around his mother. I'm so sorry, he said to the frozen image. And for the first time in a very long time, the billionaire who always had a plan didn't know what came next. All he knew was that the truth was no longer something he could out-organize, outspin, or outspend. It had receipts, and it was done being patient. The cafe on River Street wasn't built for billionaires. It was small, wedged between a thrift shop and an old tailor's place that still kept its original 1950s sign. The windows fogged from the hiss of the espresso machine. The air smelled like roasted beans, vanilla syrup, and lives that didn't orbit stock prices. Tasha chose it on purpose. If Julian was serious about hearing the truth, he could do it somewhere that didn't automatically tilt in his favor. She arrived early, as people who have worked in service jobs their whole lives tend to do. Habit, not hope. Her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee that had gone cold twice already. Every time the bell over the door chimed, her spine tensed. When he finally walked in, the cafe seemed to inhale. Not because anyone recognized him, but because he looked like a man whose suit didn't fit his soul anymore. Eyes rimmed with exhaustion, posture straight out of sheer will. Tasha, he said quietly. Mr. Mercer, she replied, her voice polite but distant. He sat opposite her. For a few seconds, the silence between them did all the talking. Thank you for coming, he said. I almost didn't, she answered. I wouldn't have blamed you. He looked down at his hands, at the faint tremor in them. You were right, he said finally. I saw the footage. Both of them. The house camera and the one you sent. You protected my mother and I... He swallowed. I destroyed your reputation because it was easier to believe a lie that made my life simpler. You didn't destroy my reputation, Tasha said quietly. You just reminded me how quickly someone like me can lose it. He flinched. You don't deserve that, he said. Deserve has nothing to do with it, she replied. Ask any black woman who's ever been called out of her name for doing her job too well. He didn't argue. Then let me try to do what I can, he said. I've ended my engagement with Cassandra, publicly. There's a statement going out this afternoon. No more pretending. That will cause a storm, Tasha said. It already has, he answered. But it's the only one I can live with. The waitress refilled Tasha's mug with a shy smile, then scurried away. At the back of the cafe, an old man strummed a guitar, the melody soft and worn around the edges. It sounded like something from Evelyn's record collection. My mother asks about you every day, Julian said quietly. She calls you that girl with the humming, says the house feels colder without you. Tasha blinked away, sudden heat in her eyes. She's a good woman, she said. She didn't deserve what happened. Neither did you, he replied. And I know an apology doesn't fix that, but I need to say it anyway. Then say it like you mean it, Tasha said, not unkindly. Not for your conscience, for mine. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, the billionaire veneer stripped away. I am sorry, and he said, each word slow and deliberate. I am sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I let someone else's cruelty speak louder than your courage. I'm sorry I made you walk out of that house like a criminal when you were the only one doing the right thing. Tasha held his gaze. In my life, or she said, people have apologized when they got caught, when their image was at risk, when they needed something from me. So I've learned to listen for what apology is really about. And what do you hear in mine? He asked. She studied him for a long moment. Tiredness, she said. Shame. And a man who finally believes his own mother. He huffed out a breath that was almost a laugh. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, but I do want to make amends, not by writing a check and disappearing, by doing something that actually matters. For my mother, for you, for everyone who's ever been in your position. He pulled a white envelope from his jacket and slid it across the table. She didn't even open it. She pushed it back. No, she said. It's compensation, he insisted. For the defamation, the lost income, the... You can't buy back dignity, she cut in, voice firm but calm. You can only live like you finally understand what it's worth. He sat back, chastened. Then let me try another way, he said. I've started a foundation, in my mother's name, the Evelyn Mercer Trust. It's going to support caregivers, domestic workers, low-income nurses, anyone who chooses compassion for a living and pays for it in silence. Tasha's breath caught. You don't owe me that, she said. I owe it to the woman I failed to protect, he replied, and to the woman who tried to protect her anyway. If you mean that, she said slowly, then don't build it for me. Build it for Mrs. Mercer, for all the people like her who never get believed until it's too late. He nodded. That's exactly what I intend. For a while they just sat there, the hum of the cafe filling in what words couldn't. When Tasha finally stood to leave, Julian rose too. Will I see you again? He asked. She hesitated, hand on the back of the chair. Maybe, she said, when the truth is done hurting. Outside, the city glistened in post-rain light. Tasha walked toward the bus stop, each step light but deliberate. Inside the cafe, Julian watched her go until she disappeared into the small crowd. For the first time in years, he felt something that wasn't control or pride or fear. Purpose. He went home and did something he hadn't done since his father died. He sat with his mother and told her everything. The footage, the foundation, the meeting at the cafe. You finally saw people as they are, Evelyn said, squeezing his hand. Not as you wanted them to be. I didn't like what I saw in myself, he admitted. Good, she replied softly. People who like what they see when they've hurt someone, they're the ones to be afraid of. That night, while Tasha sat on the edge of her motel bed watching the local news tease the Mercer scandal, and while Cassandra paced her penthouse like a cornered animal, Julian drafted a press release that didn't read like his PR team had written it. It was short, direct, and for once, honest. The engagement between Julian Mercer and Cassandra Blake has been terminated. Recent events in our home revealed conduct that is incompatible with the values my family stands for. I take full responsibility for the harm my misjudgment caused, particularly to a former employee, Ms. Tasha Rivers, whose integrity and courage have been proven beyond question. The Evelyn Mercer Trust will be established to support caregivers, domestic workers, and underpaid nurses. This is not charity, it is restitution, for my part in a system that often punishes the very people who keep our families alive. No spin, no unfortunate misunderstandings. just truth. The storm that followed was loud. Headlines, talk shows, comment sections divided between those who wanted Cassandra's head and those who wanted Julian's. Lawyers calling, board members wringing their hands over brand damage. But under the noise, something else was happening. People who had been invisible were suddenly being seen. Caregivers wrote in from all over the state with stories that sounded too much like Tasha's. Nurses who'd been shouted at, maids who'd been slapped, elderly patients who'd been ignored until someone unimportant spoke up. The Mercer scandal had accidentally opened a door. Tasha watched all of it from a distance. She got offers for interviews she declined, requests for comment she ignored. She hadn't risked everything to become a spectacle. She'd done it because an old woman in a knit cardigan had squeezed her hand and whispered, "Stay, please. I'm afraid of her when I'm alone." A week after the press release, a black sedan pulled up in front of Whispering Pines. For a second, Tasha's heart stopped. Too many rich cars had brought too much trouble into her life. But when the driver stepped out and opened the back door, it wasn't Cassandra in stilettos who emerged. It was Evelyn Mercer, wrapped in a pale blue shawl, leaning on a cane, eyes bright. "Tea, Mrs. Mercer?" Tasha stammered, hurrying forward. "Just Evelyn, dear," the older woman said, voice warm. "I heard somewhere that Motel 6 was the new Four Seasons." Julian followed, carrying a thermos and frowning at every crack in the sidewalk. "What are you doing here?" Tasha asked, completely disarmed. "Being stubborn," Evelyn replied. "I told my son I'd like to die, knowing I'd gone where I was welcome, not just where people bowed to my last name. And I told her she shouldn't say things like die while leaning on an ankle-high curb," Julian muttered. Evelyn waved him off and took Tasha's hand. "You saved my life," she said simply, "and you paid for it. The least I can do is show my face where your courage landed you." Tasha swallowed hard. "You don't owe me that." "Stop saying things people like me are supposed to say," Evelyn chided gently. "Let me be decent for once without arguing." Akom. They sat together in the tiny motel lobby, sipping coffee from mismatched cups while the desk clerk pretended not to eavesdrop. For the first time since that day in the library, Tasha felt something shift inside her. Not that the hurt was gone, but it had somewhere to go. Within a month, the Evelyn Mercer Trust had a temporary office in one wing of the mansion and a permanent place in the conversations of Charleston's wealthy. Some donors came out of guilt, some out of curiosity, and a few because they recognized an uncomfortable truth. They'd all had a Cassandra in their house at some point, and almost all of them had dismissed a Tasha. "Come back," Evelyn said one afternoon, watching Tasha read over grant applications at the kitchen table. "Not as staff. As staff, they can fire you. Come back as something they can't get rid of so easily." Julian nodded from the other side of the table. "Director of Community Programs," he suggested, "or whatever title you want. Just be here. Help us make sure this isn't just a PR Band-Aid." Tasha stared at the offer letter he slid toward her. Full-time salary, benefits, decision-making power. There was a time she would have grabbed it without thinking. Now she took a breath and said, "I'll come back, on one condition." "Name it," Julian said. "You never call what we're doing here charity," she replied. "This isn't you rescuing anyone. It's you paying a debt you didn't know you had." He smiled, a real humbled smile. "Deal." In the months that followed, the mansion changed. Not its bones. There were still marble floors and high ceilings, and doors that closed a little too quietly. But its heartbeat, the front gate, once a barrier, opened more often. Caregivers came in their scrubs and sensible shoes, not through the service entrance, but through the front door. Workshops happened in rooms that used to only host fundraisers and photo shoots. And in all of it, Tasha moved with the same quiet steadiness she'd always had. Only now, instead of dusting surfaces no one saw, she was rearranging lives people had long stopped believing could change. Sometimes late at night, when the last volunteer had gone home and the house had settled into its new kind of quiet, she would stand at the library doorway and look at the spot where everything had fallen apart. The crack in the railing where the bullet had splintered wood the night Cassandra came back with a gun. Because yes, pain doesn't surrender without a final tantrum. The camera now visible, a small red eye above the doorway. "You remember, don't you?" she'd murmured to the house. And in the creak of the old beams, In the way the air no longer felt like it was holding its breath, she felt the answer. Houses remember kindness. People do too, even if it takes them longer. One crisp autumn evening, as golden leaves skittered down the Mercer driveway, Julian joined Tasha on the terrace overlooking the garden. Below, a group of scholarship recipients laughed over plastic cups of cider. Evelyn napped in a chair nearby, shawl slipping from her shoulders. You once told me, Julian said, that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just breathes. Tasha smiled faintly. You were actually listening. Eventually, he admitted. I thought justice would feel like winning. It doesn't. It feels like accepting you're going to hurt and choosing the truth anyway. That's because justice isn't about punishing bad people, she said softly. It's about protecting the vulnerable. You finally understood who that was in your own house. They stood there in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Do you ever regret it? He asked after a while. What you did that day? Would you do it again knowing it would cost you everything? Tasha watched Evelyn's chest rise and fall, slow, peaceful. I lost a job, she said. I lost a paycheck, but I didn't lose myself. And I gained this. She gestured to the garden, the foundation, the laughing caregivers who no longer felt alone. So yes, she said, I'd do it again. Julian nodded, eyes bright. That's what I hoped you'd say. Far away from Charleston, in a small city where scandals travel slower and pride heals even slower than that, a woman named Cassandra Blake scrolled through articles she tried to pretend weren't about her. The footage, the headlines, the think pieces about racism and class, and what happens when the rich choose silence. People had stopped recognizing her on the street now. That hurt more than the hatred. But sometimes, late at night, she would jolt awake to the memory of her own voice echoing off marble. You useless black maid! And she'd realize that the worst part wasn't that the world heard her say it, it was that she had meant it. What she did with that realization, whether she let it turn her bitter or better, was another story. This one didn't belong to her anymore. It belonged to the woman who took a kick for a stranger, got fired for telling the truth, and refused to become what the world called her. It belonged to the son who finally believed his mother, even when it meant tearing his own life apart and building something better from the rubble. It belonged to an old woman with a bruised shoulder and an unbroken spirit who taught everyone around her that forgiveness isn't letting people off the hook. It's cutting the rope that keeps you tied to their cruelty. In the end, the billionaire saw his fiancée abuse his mother, and the black maid did the unthinkable. Wasn't really a story about a billionaire at all. It was a story about what happens when the quietest person in the room is the one who chooses courage. About how truth, once given proof and a voice, doesn't just clear a name. It changes what a house stands for. It turns a place of polished secrets into a home where storms still come, but no one faces them alone.